Welcome to Everybody's Business. I'm your host, Valerie Hellerman, and today I'm really happy to have as my guest Shahid Haque, who is a lawyer here in town, an immigration lawyer at the Border Crossing Law Firm. And Shahid is also president of the Montana Immigrant Justice Alliance. Welcome, Shahid.
Thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm really happy to have you because immigration is a big issue these days. And I'd like to share with our audience some of the issues here in Montana about immigration. And first, I'd like to just ask on a national level, what is our immigration policy right now? And what are what's going on with our immigration policy?
Well, on the national level, right now there are a lot of people talking about comprehensive immigration reform, and there's a broad sentiment that our immigration system isn't working and that we need to fix it. And a big reason why our immigration system isn't working is because over the course of the last 20 or 30 years, our immigration system has become more and more restrictive, creating new bars to entry, creating new ways to remove immigrants, and these things have ultimately, they just don't work. These types of restrictions, rather than helping curb illegal immigration, they've actually caused more illegal immigration. Because when you remove ways that people can fix their status, remove ways that people can legally enter the country to be together with their families, it ultimately drives illegal immigration. And illegal immigration has also been caused by other things like trade policies. There's a lot to talk about in terms of, people look at immigration as being an issue solely relating to immigration policy and immigration issues. But the truth is that immigration is driven by political factors and economic factors. And for instance, the North American Free Trade Agreement is widely disparaged by labor groups because it exports jobs overseas, but by the same token, NAFTA allows for the free flow of products, but not people. And what it did in a lot of cases is destroy the Mexican markets, where Mexican farmers, for instance, couldn't possibly compete with multinational companies coming in under NAFTA to set up their own big businesses where they don't pay workers very well, and they put farmers out of business, or flooding the market with products like corn tortillas that Mexican farmers traditionally did. And so what you'd see is that people would lose their jobs, lose their farms, go to work at these multinational companies. The average lifespan of a worker in these types of factories is 2 to 3 months due to the conditions. And then ultimately coming to the United States to provide for their families, find a way to survive. And so in terms of the broader immigration debate and the system that we have right now, our current immigration laws were really built upon the Immigration and Nationality Act in 1960 or so. I believe it was 1965. And then in 1996, there was a very restrictionist policy put in place that stands to this day to bar a lot of, I just know hundreds of Montana families that have no ability to fix their immigration status because of this 1996 law. And where we are right now is that they say there are, about 11 million undocumented immigrants in the state, in the United States. As far as in the state of Montana, nobody can really provide you with very accurate statistics. One group that isn't necessarily to be trusted, but it's an anti-immigrant group. They might be prone to inflate their numbers of undocumented immigrants. They say there's only about 4,000. I think that number is likely wrong, and it's likely a little bit more than that. But we're here in the state of Montana. We're not talking about huge numbers of undocumented immigrants, not enough to really create a problem that Montanans need to worry about or anything of that nature. But there are undocumented immigrants living here, and most of them are in mixed status families, which would mean one of their spouses or children is a U.S. citizen.
So how does one become undocumented? What does that actually mean?
That's a great question, because a lot of people use that term without knowing what it means, or lump a lot of different people into that. So one way that you might be undocumented is if you lack valid immigration status because you entered the country legally, say you entered as a visitor or you entered here on a work visa, but you never returned back home. So you might have overstayed a visa. Another way is you might have actually illegally entered the country altogether. So you may have actually crossed the border illegally and come right into the country without ever being inspected by an immigration officer. Sometimes you find, and it's an important distinction, that people actually presented themselves at the border and they were just waved on in, just come on in. And that happens, and that's a different situation. And so there are people who came in to the country and then applied for refugee status. Those people, you might say, they're undocumented until they get their refugee status, but they came here as political refugees, escaping torture, abuse, and illegal detentions in their home countries. Other people have come into the country, and we see this a lot. There's a lot of this here in Montana, unfortunately, where you have immigrant spouses of U.S. citizens, typically female spouses, who are being abused by their U.S. citizen spouses in a domestic violence situation. And so the U.S. citizen spouse will hold immigration status over their head. Technically, they're undocumented, but it's because the U.S. citizen husband or wife, in some cases, is refusing to apply for their immigrant visa because they use that as a way to hold them hostage, hold them prisoners. Use that as a way to say, well, if you tell the police that I'm beating you, I'm going to have you deported. And I've seen several cases right here in Montana where they did just that. As after the wife reported the abuse, they went to ICE. They said, hey, my wife's undocumented. And ICE, very sadly went ahead and arrested and detained and is seeking to deport, in one case, a domestic violence victim, even though it was the U.S. citizen spouse who was abusing her who reported it to them. So, that person might be called undocumented as well. But that's one of the fallacies of saying that, all undocumented people need to just leave the country, or why are you here without status? Can't you just follow the law? It's because it's a very different group of people. There are kids who came in when they were, very young and have lived their entire life here, but they never had immigration status. So they'd be undocumented. But, you can't lump everyone's situation together into one group. They're very different.
Yeah. And in Montana, who are the immigrants, the undocumented immigrants? What is their ethnicity, or where are they from?
So, according to a lot of statistics, the largest group of immigrants in the state of Montana are Canadians. And, it makes sense. We border with Canada. But they're also our largest undocumented population segment. And a lot of people don't realize that because they, a lot of Canadians may be Caucasian and they may blend in with the average Montanan is Caucasian as well. So a lot of people don't realize that. But in Canada, if Canadians can enter the United States without a visa, they can just show up at the border and say, hey, I want to come on in. And they're allowed to enter as visitors for up to 6 months. But they're not allowed to work when they do that, and they're not allowed to do a lot of different things. They're just supposed to be a visitor for up to 6 months. But you see a lot of Canadians will just stay, they may work, they may get a job, and all those things would render them undocumented. Same way that somebody from Mexico who overstayed a visa would be undocumented as well. So in most cases, a Canadian isn't illegally entering, but they are often overstaying the length of time they're allowed to stay in the U.S.
So they're kind of in the group that get waved across the border.
Yeah. And, interestingly enough, I've had Latino clients, typically from Mexico, who have trouble getting driver's licenses even though they're entitled to them. And we kind of have to go back and forth a little bit. Whereas sometimes you'll have a Canadian person who I'm questioning, how in the world did you get that license? You never were entitled to it, and they were able to get them. So
there's some racism involved here in immigration policy.
There's no question about it. I mean, unfortunately, the sad fact is that Montana is pretty homogenous. It's very the minority groups. The largest minority group, of course, are Native Americans, and then Latinos and Asians are next. But there are small percentages, and so what you see is that when Montanans get to know this, get to know these groups of immigrants, they often, I hear people who are they just absolutely will stand to the death and love their immigrant neighbors. But when they don't know you yet, there's a lot of fear, a lot of suspicion. There's a lot of racial profiling in terms of law enforcement stops, and racial profiling in terms of extra screening for benefits that other people are able to get freely, and things of that nature are pretty commonplace. It's a big reason why I started the Montana Immigrant Justice Alliance. I basically saw that the work I do as an immigration attorney only goes so far. I can help people with their immigration, prevent their deportation, get their visas, but if you want to shape the way you want Montanans to learn about the values immigrants bring to the state, if you want them to understand, why some of these talking points that they hear about, just deport them all or get in line, why those are not true, you've got to do something more. You've got to educate and start a group like MIHA that works for that.
So one of the things that I hear from people about immigrants, or especially illegal immigrants, is that they're afraid they're going to take our jobs away.
Yeah, you hear that a lot. In fact, that was one of the major motivating factors for LR 121, which was a statewide referendum. It was not a voter-initiated referendum. It was something that the legislature stuck on the ballot for Montanans to vote on. But that was one of the reasons they put that on the ballot. And that referendum said, do you want to deny state services to illegal aliens? But it wasn't very clear about what state services. It wasn't clear about how they would screen to determine who was who. And so, we think there was a lot of confusion with that when it passed and was put on the ballot, and we're challenging the constitutionality of it. But the idea that immigrants are taking our jobs is fundamentally flawed for a lot of different reasons. One reason is because you ask any farmer in the state of Montana, or anybody who's working in certain fields, and they will tell you that they need that immigrant labor in order to keep their business going. It's because not necessarily, it's not that immigrants are willing to work for lower wages necessarily than U.S. workers, but it's that the immigrants are willing to work for a fair wage when U.S. workers aren't willing to do that particular job. Mm-hmm. And so that's pretty common. But even beside that point, economists have studied the issue of the impact undocumented immigrants have on the economy. And study after study has confirmed that when immigrants join a community, they work hard, they earn their money in that community, but they also spend their money in that community. They go to the grocery store. Immigrant families often save less and spend more, and so that ultimately goes back into the community, allows the stores to earn more money, allows them to hire more workers. And so it's not like there are a set number of jobs, and if an immigrant takes that job, the job's gone. It just doesn't work that way. It's kind of just a false talking point. It may seem to make sense, but it really doesn't. Mm-hmm. And so, and at any rate, even if you believed that there were harms from immigrants joining the workforce, again, the solution to that would be that a rising tide lifts all boats. And if everybody were legalized, studies have shown that as soon as immigrants get status, they very quickly are unwilling to work in worse labor conditions. They're unwilling to work for less wages. They very quickly, it levels the playing field very, mm-hmm. very fast. Mm-hmm. So.
And what about public services? I mean, that was another issue that was addressed in LR 121.
Right. So LR 121 would say that anyone applying for certain state services, and there's a laundry list of them, would have to prove their immigration status or their citizenship before they could get those benefits. And there are limited benefits that the federal government already says you have to prove. But what LR 121 does is it tries to go farther than that. And it says that you actually have to now prove things like before you can get attendance to a public university, now you have to prove your immigration status. That's never been the case before. To go to Montana State or University of Montana, immigration status hasn't been inquired into. If you're the victim of a crime, you have to prove your immigration status, things like that. But where they run into problems are, first of all, how do you determine who you're going to check for immigration status and who you don't? And what I haven't heard from any state agency so far is that every person walking in the door has to undergo the same examination. There's been no action taken to implement this policy such that it applies to every Montanan. Instead, there seems to be a little leeway there. If you're not going to apply to everybody, seems like maybe only those who come in and sound or look different than the average Montanan are going to be the ones who are screened. And that's unconstitutional. If you're going to apply it, you've got to apply it to everybody. But even if you do apply it to everybody, after I filed this lawsuit to challenge LR 121, I heard from so many different Caucasian Montanans who've been living here for a really long time who said that they don't have the documents that they need under LR 121. A big part of it is there are kids born on military bases overseas. So if their parents were stationed at a military base in the UK, Canada, or anywhere, and their child was born there, there's a process where parents can register that foreign birth with the Department of State and get a U.S. birth certificate. But a lot of parents don't really do that. And so what you've got is a Canadian birth certificate or a UK birth certificate, and you don't have a U.S. birth certificate. So they often don't have a way to really prove their citizenship. And sometimes documents have been lost, and in some cases there's complications with adoptions, and can get very complicated.
It's always hard to backtrack.
Yeah. I think that as the state tries to implement this, if they ever do, they'll find that it's not as easy as they think it is.
Yeah. So you're the Montana Immigration Justice Alliance. You're working on this, challenging this referendum.
Right.
And you've had some successes with that.
Yes, actually, so far the judge has entered. This is Judge Sherlock, and this is the case was here in Helena, in the district court. And Judge Sherlock has entered a partial preliminary injunction. So that would stop the state from, for instance, they wanted to use a particular federal database with an improper purpose. It's not intended for that purpose. So the judge blocked them from using it for that purpose. The law was written very badly and would actually have applied to certain immigrants who are here legally, perfectly legally here. That conflicts with federal law very clearly, so he stopped that part. But we're still challenging the rest of it, and the case is still pending, and we're looking forward to going forward. The state tried to dismiss our action, and they were rejected on that, so it's going forward.
So we're running out of time here. This has been very interesting. So Shahid, what is something that we can all do to educate ourselves on this, on immigration, and kind of support solving the problem?
Well, one thing you could do is, you could always check out on mija.org, mija.org. I've actually tried to put together some resources. One of them is a PowerPoint presentation, and it's geared towards kind of debunking myths about our immigration system. And so things like, why can't everybody just get in line?
Right.
My ancestors got in line. In fact, Senator John Tester used to have a constituent letter, and it said, I'm against amnesty because my grandparents came in as homesteaders, and they came here legally. Why can't everybody? Well, there's a very clear reason why, because the immigration system has changed dramatically since the days of homesteaders and since the days of Ellis Island. The immigration system now is very different. There are specific ways you can get into the country, and a lot of people don't fit into those categories. So what I would encourage everybody to do is move past the talking points, move past the simplistic ideology, because this is a complicated issue. And the more you educate yourself, the more you're going to realize that immigrants are human beings, and no human being is illegal.
Oh, I like that. Thank you so much, Shahid. So please check out that website, Montana Immigrant Justice Alliance. And thank you, Shahid.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, and goodbye from Everybody's Business.